All right, so sampling IRL. What the heck do we need to do for this? How do we know what we need to do? I get it. It's not the easiest thing in the world. So the video at the bottom shows some mistakes students make. Most commonly, students abuse statistical language. They'll talk about taking a stratified sample, but the thing they're stratifying on will be something that they'd have to have that sort of information about ahead of time. So I can't say I'm going to stratify people based on their income level when I'm going to go out and talk to people outside in a park or something, because how would I know what their income level was when I'm going to the park? Like, that doesn't make sense. You might be able to stratify within the perfect scenario, right? If you have all of the data available to you, if you know, I don't know, census data for San Diego, you could theoretically, I guess, stratify by different income levels. But more realistically, you'd still probably just stratify based on zip code. And again, there's no reason to use those statistical terms here. They're just going to get you in trouble when you didn't need to do that. So what you need to do is you need to just do this once. Sometimes students will do it twice. You're going to come up with some population that you would be interested in knowing more about. So you could just say college students. Now that's a huge, broad population, so I recommend maybe not going that broad into all college students and instead like narrowing it down. You do need your group to be larger than 200 people because we want to talk about how we would at least get a sample of about 20 from that, or 100 people. And if it's, you know, I had students last semester who used like the football team as their example. And I was like, well, if I wanted to take a sample of the football team, I would just do a census of the football team because I could talk to every single one of them. It's not that impractical. But if I'm talking about every student athlete, now it becomes more challenging. So first things first, pick your population. Pick something not too humongous, but maybe not too small. That's sort of where you're looking for in terms of your population. Then you're going to come up with this perfect scenario. So what I mean by a perfect scenario is if you were someone who had all of this information, who could actually get this, you could either take a census, right? I could talk to every football player, because that was a very small, silly sample, or I could go and take a simple random sample of all the student athletes, right? I could just randomly sample 100 student athletes. Either one of those is completely legit. If I'm going to take a census, I have to have a roster with every single football player on it. If I'm going to take a simple random sample, I'm going to need a list of every single student athlete because there's no way for me to get data or to randomly select them without knowing who they are. So typically, you're talking about a list of everyone in your population. That's what you're looking for. And the harder piece of this is who might have this information. So if you were going to take a beautiful, legitimate sample, who would have this, right? If I'm the athletic director for Mesa or the head of that department or our research office, I would have that information. Heck, I might even be able to get, if I'm talking about just the football team, that information by going to the website as a regular human. But typically we're not going to have that because we're not dealing with such a small sample as we are with the football team, which is why that one was incorrect. Now realistically, say I am me and I want to talk to student athletes, right? I happen to play in the school and I am interested to know something about them, maybe whether or not their studies suffer as a result of how much practice they have to do. Now I'm going to go, okay, I need to take a sample of student athletes. How am I going to do that? Well, people will say is, I'll just take a simple random sample. Again, you don't have a list, so you can't do that. But you could say, I'm going to go to a number of games and ask athletes some questions. Now, here's where I want you to be specific, and this is where students miss a lot of points on this one. When you talk about going to a game, which games are you going to go to? I'm going to go to a football game, I'm going to go to a volleyball game, I'm going to go to a basketball game. Talk about which games you would head to. And again, right now we're assuming COVID doesn't exist. We're assuming we have more time and energy than we actually have, right? It's the summer, no sports are in session, so this is not practical. And since we're in a pandemic, there's no telling that these sports would actually have games or that I'd be allowed to attend them. But if the world was back to normal, this is what I would do. And try to stick to realistic, right? I'm not going to go to a game for every single sport because that would take me the entire school year to accomplish. I might just go to a game for every sport that exists in the fall. Or I might choose a couple of sports to be representative of all the sports. Now, technically, we're kind of looking at a stratified here by going to each of those games. Or we could almost call it a cluster if we went to one and then talked to all of the people who were there. But we don't want to get that specific because even then, technically, we're not meeting those requirements. We're not going to randomly sample the players once we're at a game, so we don't really have a stratified. And I'm not going to randomly select games if I'm doing a cluster because I want to go to the games that are the most convenient for me. I'm not going to go to the away games. I'm going to go to the home games and probably in a certain time period. So the realistic scenario is most likely not going to meet any of our great sampling methods we talked about. It is going to be a convenient sample because convenient samples are realistic. And so that's where you're going to get your limitations. Right? I only talk to fall sports, so I don't know the impact of sports that are later in the semester. I only went to certain games, so any athlete who wasn't at those games was not represented, yada, yada, yada. If I go and I'm just asking athletes, some of them are going to refuse to participate, right? I'm going to have some non-response. That's where we're looking. Now, I hope, and I could be wrong, let me move my face. I'm in student view, so this should work. If you're in student view on these, you can click Show Rubric, and this will show you exactly what I'm going to be grading you based on. I didn't make this yet for the other one, the stats and the media, because I just made that one from an old Blackboard discussion. But you can see requirements met. Like you're going to get 6 points if you submit it on time, and it's the right length of being like 250 words or whatever strange metric. As long as it's not like super short, you're good. If you are super short, but you manage to accomplish everything, you're just going to get marked too short. If you submit it late, so if you wait until after Sunday to do it, you're just losing 3 points. So you can still get an 85% on this thing. And then you can see the perfect scenario. Basically here I'm looking for, did you define who would have this information and what information they would need in order to take a census or an SRS? A realistic scenario, did you actually tell me how you're going to select a sample? And is it realistic, right? So you can lose points if you don't give me enough information. Like, I'm going to go to games. Like, which games? Like, give me a little bit more because we want some. And then limitations. If you're missing something that seems glaringly obvious to me, I'm going to give you a 3 here. And I'll usually comment with what I think is that glaringly obvious thing that you didn't tackle. But if you didn't have a realistic scenario in the first place, typically you can't really do the limitations portion. So that's where you'll get this piece here. And then, again, just don't throw out the word stratified. Everybody wants to all the time. Don't do that, because if you misuse any vocab, I'll mark it as 0. But, again, I will give you feedback within this. Typically, this particular assignment requires me to regrade at least once. It's a pain in the butt. Like I said, I hate it. I think it's a really valuable one, and I really do enjoy the conversations that come out of it. But grading it is always terrible because it requires me to do a lot of work and give a lot of feedback. So I'm expecting this to be a learning opportunity for all of us as we go through this rubric and we sort of refine our sampling idea as we move forward. This was a very long video. I talked way too much, but I know some people really want to get in. So hopefully this sets your mind at ease in terms of sampling IRL. And my picture is here, so I am, you feel very supported by video me.